Isaiah 28 serves as the gateway to the second great cycle of prophecies, opening with a view of the terraced hills of the northern kingdom. The geography of Samaria defines the opening oracle. The capital of Ephraim sat on a hill rising 90 to 120 meters above the surrounding valley. Crowned with olive groves and vines, the city's physical beauty mirrored a floral wreath resting on the head of the landscape. This relief displays Egyptian chariots, illustrating the military might the southern kingdom of Judah sought to acquire. King Hezekiah has replaced King Ahaz, and the political elite in Jerusalem are now secretly seeking an alliance with Egypt to counter the threat of Assyria. Despite the change in leadership and the change in allies, the underlying pathology remains. The political elite refuse to trust the Lord, preferring the illusion of safety provided by foreign treaties. Isaiah 28 provides a precise anatomical diagnosis of spiritual reliance on human engineering. It exposes the structural failure that occurs when a nation substitutes divine instruction for political pragmatism. The chapter operates through a mechanism of prophetic inversion. God intercepts the cynical, rebellious language of the political elite, stripping it of its original intent and weaponizing it into an instrument of his judgment. 3 Hebrew lexical axes structure this chapter. First is ateret, the wreath. Second is sav lasav, a line or mockery. Third is aven, the stone. These ancient words generate the foundational vocabulary for New Testament ecclesiology. The prophet's language becomes the early church's architecture. Our investigation follows how God structurally flips these 3 axes of judgment into messianic grace. We begin with the first axis, atera, the wreath or crown. In the opening verses, it represents the literal fading glory of Ephraim's political elites, who are feasting even as their destruction approaches. The Hebrew morphology in verses 1 and 3 is highly specific. Isaiah uses the word shikareh. This identifies the rulers not as casual drinkers, but as chronic, unrepentant drunkards. He pairs this with the phrase halume yain, which translates literally to smitten by wine. The verb for smitten here is halam. It implies being physically struck down or beaten with a hammer. The text suggests the wine itself is an active weapon, striking the elites down before the enemy even arrives. This stone relief shows Assyrian soldiers drawing their bows. Isaiah establishes a prophetic sequence. The hammer of wine precedes the literal hammer of the Assyrian invasion. Drunkenness and military defeat are described using the same language of impact. In verse 5, God executes the divine inversion. The fading floral crown of the elites is stripped away. In its place, the Lord of hosts himself becomes an invisible crown of beauty for the surviving remnant of the people. Human glory inevitably fades like a trampled wreath. This sets the stage for the true, incorruptible crown, the typological precursor to the crown of thorns and the crown of life. The second axis appears in verses 10 and 13, with the phrase sav la sav, kav la kav. This phrase carries a dual meaning. On one level, kav is a builder's measuring line used by stonemasons. On another, it is a truncated, mimetic baby talk, sav la sav, used by the drunken elites to mock Isaiah, complaining that he speaks to them like toddlers. Isaiah structures this mockery into a precise chiasm, top and bottom reading sav la sav. In the center, God offers rest, menuka. They reject the center, so God flips the chiasm, returning their mocking syllables as the brutal language of invaders. Mockery becomes judgment. The Apostle Paul cites this exact verse in 1 Corinthians 14:21 to explain the gift of tongues. The incomprehensible, stammering language of judgment in Isaiah structurally flips to become the sign of Pentecostal grace. Foreign tongues are now the mechanism used to arrest and convert the unbeliever. We reach the third axis in verse 15, which exposes the political reality of Judah's rulers. The leaders boast that they have made a covenant with death. Historically, this refers to King Hezekiah's secret treaties with Egypt, designed to counter the Assyrian Empire. Patristic commentators like Jerome and Ephraim the Syrian clarify that to the prophets, this is never mere statecraft. A treaty forged in rebellion against God represents a literal ontological alliance with demonic falsehood and the kingdom of death. They are not buying insurance, they are befriending the grave. Geopolitical maneuvering without God is ultimately exposed as a spiritual suicide pact. Breaking it requires a foundation far heavier than political policy. These massive, immovable foundation stones in an archaeological excavation represent God's countermove in verse 16, the laying of the cornerstone in Zion. The Hebrew text underscores its permanence through morphology. Isaiah doubles the word for stone, aven, even, and follows it with a figura etymologica, a repetition of the root word for foundation. This creates the linguistic equivalent of a permanently fixed bedrock. A critical textual divergence emerges. The Hebrew Masoretic text reads, Lo yahish, will not hasten or panic, but the Greek Septuagint translates it as ou me katashunthi, will not be put to shame. This Greek translation serves as the philological bridge to the New Testament. The apostles Peter and Paul extract this exact Septuagint phrasing in 1 Peter 2 and Romans 9 to define the theological identity of the Christian church. St. John Chrysostom notes that a cornerstone must be the hardest stone of all because it compresses 4 distinct walls into one unified structure. In Christ, those walls are Jews, Gentiles, heaven, and earth. The church's entire ecclesiology rests on a single reality. God laid an unshakable cornerstone in Zion, specifically to shatter human covenants with death. Verses 23 through 29 address how God administers this architectural judgment. This circular threshing floor anchors Isaiah's parable of the farmer. Isaiah details differing agricultural methods. A farmer uses a light stick to beat delicate black cumin, but requires a heavy cartwheel to thresh tough wheat. This embeds a specific theological philosophy of punishment. God is not a blind thresher. He calibrates his discipline to the capacity and the condition of the recipient. Furthermore, it establishes the absolute limits of divine wrath. God allows the heavy wheel to roll over the wheat to separate the grain, but he intentionally stops before grinding it into useless dust. The violent disruptions of history are not blind destruction. They are the surgically precise threshing of a master farmer, separating grain from chaff to preserve his remnant. The architecture of Isaiah 28 connects directly to the church's liturgical life. The text is read on Thursday of the 4th week of Great Lent, the week of the veneration of the cross. During this service, the cross stands exposed in the exact center of the nave. As the congregation looks upon the cross, the Old Testament reading proclaims the words of Isaiah, Behold, I lay a stone in Zion. The cross standing in the center of the temple is the tested cornerstone. It is the foundation that passed through death without shame. This leads to the final, piercing metaphor of verse 20. The prophet describes a short bed, with a blanket too narrow to wrap yourself in. Jerome reads this as the ultimate diagnosis of spiritual dualism. The short bed represents the agonizing impossibility of attempting to serve 2 masters simultaneously. If the short bed represents the impossibility of human compromise, what exactly are you trying to fit on the bed next to the cornerstone?